There's something about climate change in particular that makes it difficult for people to engage with because it is such a mirror on humanity in general, right? Because it is so tightly tied to the day-to-day lives of everyday people, because it's the air we breathe, it's turning on the lights, it's starting your car, it's cooking dinner. I mean, it's everything. It's everywhere, right? It's the background noise. And so I think that trying to frame and develop innovative and oblique and, maybe humorous or disarming ways of communicating about it is really important. That was, me speaking to Jae Canetti, host of the Terra.talk podcast, for this very special episode of Climate Swings. As some of you already know, Terra is an international platform for learning and engagement on climate action, and its flagship Learning for Action course was one of the most important early parts of my own climate journey. In this episode, I get to take a turn in the hot seat for a change. Jae, the host of Terra's official podcast, asks me about my own swings into climate, my thoughts on content and marketing in our current age of generative artificial intelligence, and how we can engage more people in the climate fight. This episode is also cross-posted on the Terra.talk podcast feed, so go smash that subscribe button there as well. Of course, a big thanks to Jae and the entire Terra team for having me. So let's get into it.
Michael, we're going. Who are you?
I'm Michael Gold, climate communications consultant and professional and podcaster, host of the Climate Swings podcast.
And if you remember at the end of season 1, I told you guys to go run over to Michael's podcast and listen. So I hope you did your homework, because now he's here to check up on you and there will be consequences. Michael, climate communications, you do this for a living, I don't. And climate comms is just this big old bizarre, nebulous, multifaceted thing that is in the universe that is so wildly important, and everybody's talking about climate comms, and you need to be a good communicator and be a good storyteller. And what does that mean? Like, give me a lay of the land for the old uninitiated STEM major.
I mean, Jae, I think you really hit the nail on the head. It's really something that we all have to do. You study. So I didn't study communications. I didn't have a degree in communications. I was an anthropology major. And then I just started communicating, as you did too. I mean, you studied, I guess, hard science or technology, and now you're a climate communicator too. I mean, I say you make your living doing climate communications. I actually do a lot of writing. I do a lot of strategy. I do a lot of editing. I do a lot of positioning and messaging. And I do a lot of jumping on meetings and, talking people through like what they should talk about, basically. So it's really not that different than I think the skills that a lot of people in the climate world have to cultivate. Anyway, everybody has to communicate to a certain extent. I just sort of frame myself that way. It's what I've been doing now for several years.
Yeah, and I think it's, worth noting that if the universe of people out here don't know that neither of our podcasts are profitable, these are not our full-time jobs. You actually run a consultancy, if I'm correct on that.
I am the consultancy, yes.
You are the consultancy.
Consultancy of one.
Yeah. And just walk me through, I mean, you just gave me sort of the rough breakdown, but like, who are your clients? What generally are people bringing to the table in terms of, like you said, I mean, everybody needs to communicate, but at what point does a business or an individual come in, like, kind of either not trusting of themselves enough or not knowledgeable of what to do? Like, what are they asking you to do? Why would you bring in a consultant on climate comms?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's like not trusting of themselves or not knowing what to do. It's more like either A, they want someone outside of the organization who has a fresh perspective on the very specific issue that they're tackling, or B, they just don't have the capacity to do it themselves to like, execute the communication strategy or to like write the blog or whatever it is to do that themselves. I think a lot of that might be changing with the advent of artificial intelligence, and so that's something that I'm sure that we can get into, a little bit later down the road. But I mean, in terms of actual clients that I've had, it really runs the gamut. I've tried to keep myself open to different opportunities and organizations of all shapes and sizes and forms, ranging from venture capital to big business to nonprofit organizations, media companies. I've even done some engagements for Terra.do. So, I'm happy to go into a little bit more detail, but that's kind of the broad overview.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. That's again, we're talking about such a broad industry here that honing in on any one discipline or specific is tough. But normally, again, if you didn't hear in the intro, we're totally throwing my normal format out the window today, which is, by the way, great because I don't have to sit here with like 14 timers sitting around and like trying to do all this weird technical stuff. But because I don't have my normal setup, I'm just going to go into straight section 2. What do you do all day? Like, walk us through a project, walk us through like a day in your life doing this stuff. What are you generally working on? Kind of what software are you using? What's the makeup of your day doing all these things? Because if you're more of a writer, more of a kind of an advisor, or I guess it could vary, pretty heavily from the day to day.
So yes, that is exactly the very last point that you were making. It varies just incredibly from day to day, and I think that it depends on the type of client I'm working with at any given time. It depends on I work on a lot of proactive projects too, like my own podcast, my own Substack. It depends on the different tools that kind of emerge in the general communication space, like generative artificial intelligence, which I've been using more and more of, both in kind of my own work as well as like for different projects that I'm working on for clients. So I think that it's too variegated and diverse to really say that there's like a single I have this block of time that's devoted to this and then this block of time that's devoted to that. I mean, it is like sitting in front of a computer screen a lot of the time, thinking about ways to communicate about certain and different climate topics. And whether that means that I'm plugging that into like ChatGPT to like help me get to the place that I want to get to. I mean, oftentimes the draft that those chatbots spit out is not the final product. I would imagine, and I would hope so. But whether it's that or whether it's just like writing from scratch because I feel like I can do a better job and it's just like the words are at the tip of my fingertips. Or whether it's, like I said, kind of like jumping on a call and talking my client through, an issue with their outreach or, how we're going to do a website redesign or how we're going to position a certain campaign that they're working on. It really is just like plucking from every single part of the communications landscape. And I think if you were to talk to like a full-time head of comms or head of marketing, probably at like a climate tech company, they would probably have like, quite a bit more like sort of regimented schedule, and they might be like going to a conference or representing their company or their organization quite a bit more, but I'm just representing myself. So
sure.
I do a lot of self-promotion. That's also part of a big part of my day.
Yeah, it's the old marketing bit. Well, I guess that's a good segue into, you didn't start in this, and anytime you're a business of one or any sort of, again, operation where you are the consultant, your whole business is your brand and your knowledge and your past experience. What got you here, right? What got you to the point where you're comfortable enough being paid to advise? Because it's a bit of a stressful thing for anybody who, really cares about what they do. There's always kind of that sort of element to that, devil on the shoulder saying like, hey, you're not qualified to say this. You have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I think a lot of climate people in general have to kind of like shake off their imposter syndrome because they probably didn't come through like a climate training or like a climate. They didn't they don't have an advanced degree in it or whatever. So, I mean, that is a lot of just learning by osmosis and learning by doing and learning by talking to people, learning by reading. In terms of like the actual comms work, I mean, I do have a professional, but I do come from media. I worked in, if you really want to go back to the beginning, I worked for a Chinese state-run newspaper called the Global Times when I lived in Beijing, right after college, essentially.
Yeah.
I did that for a couple of years. It was great fun. Then I moved over to Reuters, the newswire, and I was the Taiwan correspondent for a couple of years. Also a really interesting and fun
That's an interesting
adventure.
segue, going from the Chinese state-run newspaper to the Taiwan correspondent.
Yeah, for Reuters. I managed to get fluent in Chinese in a very short period of time doing that, because you have to just sort of like dive in head first when you're doing something like that. There were only like really like 3 English language reporters in the entire country of Taiwan, basically the entire island. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I moved over to the Economist Group. So it's the big media organization that publishes The Economist, as we all know. I was working for a division called the Economist Intelligence Unit, which also has like a couple of subdivisions. One is kind of like produces intelligence documents and reports for industry and business and whatnot.
The other one's the CIA.
Right, exactly. They're all CIA agents. The side I was working on was actually more on the media editorial side. We were doing partnerships with brands and sponsors and companies and organizations that wanted to work with The Economist to like basically promote a message or sort of like embed their marketing within kind of like a broader thought leadership space. So like, for example, like, a big company that is working on artificial intelligence or the future of data would commission the Economist Group and the Economist Intelligence Unit in particular to write a research report, do a survey, maybe do an index, do interviews with experts, maybe do like some modeling or, data visualizations about the future of big data and the future of artificial intelligence. Then we, as the Economist Intelligence Unit, would publish that under the Economist brand with the sponsor sort of like, labeled as such, basically as a sponsor. And then, it would be sort of put out in the world with some marketing behind it. And kind of, we would sort of have that win-win engagement afterward. And so I did that for a couple of years, and there was sort of like nibbling around the edges of climate and sustainability topics at the time, like throughout basically all the work that I did, including the Global Times, Reuters, and The Economist. But it was only when I decided in 2021 that I really wanted to go off on my own and become a freelancer that I decided that climate was my space, was my field. And I founded Word Clouds Consulting, which is my brand.
Awesome. Let me just quickly rewind back to your time at The Economist. There's something interesting there that I want to kind of dig into, right? There's always, in media outlets, right, they need to make money. And, as I understand it, a big portion of that money or a portion of that money can come from, maybe I'm mislabeling this, but like sponsored research. And especially in the climate space, you get smaller newspapers that are more kind of, tied into single topics. Like you'll get, like I'm in the energy space, so I read like a solar magazine and a solar newspaper and like a more kind of broader utilities newspaper. And obviously the margins on those can be pretty thin because they have a limited clientele, and some of their funding can come from organizations, companies, and there can be a fairly, clear narrative of like, hey, this company who's doing this very specific thing is behind this article that's exploring this very specific thing kind of coincidentally. And, specifically in the climate space where there's already so much distrust and there's the fear of greenwashing. And especially if you kind of go more into like the people who actually have money, there's a lot of greenwashing there. Do you feel like that sort of model can translate? Do you see that sort of type of journalism in this space, and how do you feel about it? Like, is it generally kind of kosher, or can it be somewhat concerning? Like, do you see a high rate of greenwashing in that area?
You're basically asking, are these organizations like paying The Economist to help them greenwash, isn't it? To like put a patina of legitimacy behind their association with a topic, essentially.
Yeah, somewhat. And I guess I'm actually not as concerned about The Economist because they're big enough to exist globally, but even more so with like these smaller newspapers who it's like, hey, it's like either we write this thing or we go out of business. It's more on that level, but really up and down the board. I mean, from your experience, how do you feel?
I think there's a couple of layers to this. Like, first of all, I think as like a reader, you have to have like a level of credulity when you're looking at something that's sponsored by a corporate or just any kind of like, there's corporate interest, or there's like kind of interest behind all the information that we take in, essentially.
Yeah, totally.
Right? So we're looking at something on Facebook, we're looking at something on Substack, we're looking at something on the New York Times website. Like there's no such thing as just kind of like the neutral window to the world, right? Like everything has an angle, everything has a slant. There's an algorithm behind most of that stuff, right? So I think like there's that like first layer of it. So it's like, when you're and obviously when you have like multiple stakeholders, there's potentially multiple touch points of credulity that you sort of have to engage with. So it's like, it's the Economist take, but it's sponsored by, I don't know, DuPont or whatever it is. So like, yeah, you have to like, or Dow or like, Chevron or something. So you always have to like, take all of it with a grain of salt. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something to offer through these kind of engagements. And there isn't like new and valuable information, even about climate, that can be proffered through these kinds of engagements. And I think like, the other point of it, and this is something that, sort of like cuts to the grain that you were talking about previously, is that the media industry does need new and diverse revenue streams because of all this sort of algorithmically mediated disruption that I was alluding to, and helping organizations get their message out through this kind of like standing on the shoulders of legitimacy, I think really does help. It's like it is a proper revenue stream for an organization like The Economist or these little newspapers that you're talking about. And like, I don't think we should like deny the struggling legacy media a chance to diversify their revenue streams, like just because like we're a little bit like precious about greenwashing.
Yeah, no, totally. And actually, I'm more inquiring maybe about the opposite phenomenon, because I find myself, whenever I see an article, let's say like, oh, it's sponsored by, like you said, DuPont or Chevron or some other kind of big name company that we sometimes know as not being on necessarily the most pure side of climate, whatever research is in that document or whatever content's in the article, I sometimes will like immediately write it off, because I'm like, okay, someone got paid off. There's some data that's been fabricated. I've seen enough bad science in my time to know that usually when people are under pressure to produce a result, that's when things kind of get fibbed and people start taking creative liberties. But I actually think that we should maybe be giving it more leeway and more credulity, because a lot of times, like you said, there are real journalists and real writers like yourself who, of course, the organization needs money to survive. But at the same time, you have, again, career professionals who are doing this stuff and who want to put out a good product. So maybe, honestly, let's go into that a little bit. What's it like actually trying to write an article or do research under that pretext, and like balancing the idea of like, okay, I don't want to piss off the company, but I want to be honest and objective in my research? And how do you kind of straddle that line?
It's spinning plates. It's total spinning plates, man. I mean, it's honestly like you write it like a journalist, and then it gets edited like a piece of corporate communications.
Oh, okay. So it's like you do your own thing, and then you kind of just watch your dreams die as it goes up the ladder.
Well, I mean, you have to go into it again. Come back to that idea of credulity. I mean, like when you're going into this kind of work, you kind of have to have a level of acceptance that like this is not going to win a Pulitzer. You know what I mean? Like it is going to advance a message, and it's going to talk about a certain topic, in a way that is palatable to a corporate interest, and that's like fine. You know what I mean? Like like whatever, like. We're all kind of like, affected by corporations and sort of like, the bigness of sort of these interests at any given moment. So I don't necessarily feel like we have to like take a moral judgment on this kind of stuff necessarily. But at the same time, like I think it is healthy to have a degree of skepticism, like generally about like most things you read. And
Sure.
like, yes, that I think that there are definitely journalists, out there. And I've been like in the muck with like, like when I was at Reuters, I was covering like protests and plane crashes and like all kinds of crazy stuff. You know what I mean? Like really like in the journalistic trenches. And I was investigating like a cybersecurity hack from China on Taiwanese, like, government systems, and just like really getting deep in the weeds of stuff. And I find, and, of course I like admire and appreciate like genuine meaty journalism. And I feel like, and I wish that there was more support for it financially out in the world. But unfortunately, that's not, like that stuff costs money and takes time and resources. And, in the meantime, like I think that there's like a humongous gray area that you can cultivate, which, as I said before, is like financially remunerative to the media organization that can then go and pay for the journalists to cover the plane crash and the protest and investigate the cybersecurity breaches and whatnot.
Yeah. And I mean, even further, I guess, if we're kind of just going down the meta route now, th- corporate interests and just business in general are pretty much, I mean, they're embedded into the fabric of society as kind of a, I guess, a subset, or I guess not a subset, more of a byproduct of globalization and just this kind of hyper specialized world that we live in now, where the government doesn't have the expertise to know and regulate and kind of control all of these things. So actually, corporations and business has some role in governance and stewardship as well. And again, I work for a government, and we have to outsource a lot of things because we don't have the in-house expertise to take care of that. And if you look at least in the U.S. government, for American listeners, or I guess for non-American listeners too, many things get contracted out, and that's, I mean, it's a problem, because then all of a sudden you have part of your governance structure going into a for-profit company, but also you have a lot of legitimate business where it's this idea that, okay, well, the corporate interest is also bolstering some sort of societal good. And even though there's kind of this asterisk that a company is sponsoring this research and they're developing this thing, right? Look at pharma, look at the medical industry, where it, again, it's always kind of two sides of the same coin, where you have this one side, it's like, oh, they're keeping you sick, and then they're making drugs to cure the sickness. But on the other side, it's like, we don't have vaccines without pharma companies, right? So it's this really, like you said, there's that healthy degree of skepticism is necessary, but I almost, again, not to play devil's advocate, but you have to have the healthy degree of skepticism in the other direction too, where it's like, it's so easy to just blanket hate on things, where you almost need to kind of walk it back and have like the healthy degree of, well, what if they're actually, there for some sort of, meritable reason. And I think maybe your experience being on the inside of that is reflective of the sort of middle ground truth, as most things are.
Yeah, I mean, Jay, I am on like a zillion corporate mailing lists, and I listen to a zillion corporate podcasts, and I think it's
now it's a zillion and one. Welcome to Terra.talk.
Exactly. It's easy for like sort of well-educated, well-informed people like you and me to kind of do like the devil angel on the shoulder thing like all day long and kind of go back and forth about it and really like pick apart the like sort of really is like you said, like the meta questions around like what it means to like produce content and pay for content and like who's actually paying for this.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I mean, at the end of the day, like, you want to reach an audience, you want to tell an interesting story, like you want like, people to resonate with what you're putting out in the world. And especially in today's day and age, it's like harder than ever to capture attention. And like, I think that, like organizations, like people, are sort of trying different things. And, it's kind of it's a crazy world out there, and we're all just doing the best we can.
Yeah, the old the attention wars. I am horrible at clickbait, and whenever I get this stuff up on YouTube, it's gonna be a disaster.
Oh, I'm way ahead of you. I'm way ahead of you, man. Like I get like 1,000 or a few thousand views on some of my shorts, and I'm just like, wow, who is looking at this stuff? It's incredible.
The beauty of the algorithm. Don't you love it, and don't you hate
it? It's amazing.
Well, on that topic, I guess we can kind of branch two different ways, and I'll leave it open ended to which end of this you want to pick apart first. One, there's this whole idea of just Gen AI and how it's affecting the comms industry. And then the other thing I wanted to kind of get into is the whole politics of climate comms, right? And this is something that we had previously talking about, and how communicators can kind of struggle with creating any sort of momentum, whether that's, again, through an algorithm because it's some topic that isn't favorable, or whether it's trying to boost, an audience, or whether it's trying to actually push a message that is inherently political, like basically anything with climate comms is in the US. Whether it should or shouldn't be, that's a separate question, but it is. So I don't know. There's kind of these two routes that I'm straddling, and the kind of this side of how do you create this sort of this momentum on this sort of audience sort of creation side, and how do you navigate the social politics of that versus also just this other side of how is the computer and just ChatGPT running everything wild and taking all my questions and blowing them out the water because I don't understand how the new landscape works anymore.
Well, I mean, I think like on the latter point, I think writing is becoming increasingly commoditized, but I think that like the humanity inherent in communications is like all the more important because of that in a way.
100%.
Does that make sense? Like if you can people, I think a lot of times artificial intelligence can create something that feels like a convincing like simulacrum of humanity, of people, and like it becomes almost like too easy to basically just like spray and pray, as they say, basically just to like kind of produce like a fire hose of content, like and just kind of like just keep on pumping it out there and eventually hope that like one of them hits, which I think almost like perversely creates a greater incentive for the human in the loop to like really have like a curated sense of like what actually makes like for a good communications outlet, like what actually makes for like a good piece, what actually makes for like a right like a proper and sort of like genuine way of connecting with people, rather than just kind of like producing words and like sort of ad infinitum.
Yeah, no, totally. And as a writer, one of the things that, I mean, to the degree that I write sometimes, but one of the, I guess, tenets that I hold kind of close when I'm writing is that a lot of the real power in writing and in crafting a message is not just vested in what you say, but also vested in what you don't say, and kind of in like the things that you can either leave for inference or that maybe aren't, as explicit, or things that you don't cover, that you omit, right? Because it's such a big world, and the whole point of writing is you kind of have to take a narrow thing and really flesh it out and kind of navigate that overwhelm of information. And when you look at Gen AI, I mean, no matter, even if you can make it have some sort of flowery language that kind of, like you said, vaguely sounds like some educated human wrote it, the one thing that Gen AI can't do is say no, right? So if you tell it to write about something, it has to write about something, and there's no real discretion or judgment calls, at least not yet in a lot of these models, at least to the degree that I understand it, where when you use these softwares to write pieces, it's purely additive. It's just compiling information and presenting it to you, versus I think when you talk about that humanity, it almost comes back in that element of curation of the information, of saying, okay, well, I have more information than I need. What am I going to whittle down from not just this particular set of sources that I've been told to look at, but kind of the general kind of expansive knowledge that I've gained over the years? And how do I take all of that and distill it down into an article that both says and doesn't say things in a way that is readable, palatable, and navigable to an average person?
Yeah, I mean, there's like, I feel like there is a level of gut feel that you need to just inject into communications in order for it to feel genuine. And like, I will readily admit that like in a lot of my like promotional copy for Climate Swings, for my podcast, I'll lean on generative AI to like help with like, a description of this clip, or like, like a whatever, like a title of an episode or something. Yeah. Because that's like, that's the kind of thing where like all you need is just kind of like someone who's reading it on social media to like pick out a couple keywords, click through to the episode, and then like you actually get the real human beings behind what's going on.
Yeah, it's like the AI call center that directs you to the right.
Exactly. Like you're not. This does not need. It doesn't need to be Shakespeare. You know what I mean? It just needs to kind of like sort of grease the skids to get your audience like where you want them to go. But like, and I think that's why, and this goes back to what I was saying, that like the actual humanity of communications is like therefore all the more important. And that's why I think like things like podcasts have really taken off, is because there's actually a human being there. And I mean, like maybe in like 10 or 20 years there's like a world in which like you're a completely AI generated bot who's interviewing me, and like we have this kind of banter back and forth, and it feels as natural as can be. But I don't know if people really want that. Like I think people want to be with people and talk to people and engage with people. So,
Oh yeah, 100%. And also, total sidebar here. Can we talk about like what is the deal with podcasts being the new medium of advertising, right? Like, have you seen there's all these like on Instagram and on TikTok, there's these ads where they're these fully AI generated videos of people sitting and talking on podcasts that are like completely fake and purely exist for the purpose of like promoting some product. And like a lot of these like kind of self-help influencers and things like that, I'm seeing videos of AI them talking on a podcast, saying something they wrote in some article somewhere, and they've just turned it into like some sort of podcast thing. So I don't know. It's like, it almost seems like the humanity of podcasting is being weaponized to like go off straight back in AI.
Yeah, but the end goal of that is ultimately to drive traffic to the human podcast, right? Like, I mean, I don't think you're gonna. I mean, maybe you do have like a full hour of like an AI bot just like spouting off. I don't know, like with another AI bot, like maybe that would draw a big audience and get advertisers. Like, I don't know if that's really a world
that would do numbers in like 2018.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically because like the marginal cost of like producing a given unit of like advertising collateral has basically dropped to like near zero. So like you can kind of just like flood the zone with it, which is why people feel like they need to like continue to stand out. I mean, bringing it back to the climate connection, I actually think that like when you have like something interesting to say about an important topic that people really care about, like I feel like I give more leeway to people who are actually trying to lean on marketing strategies which like feel like they're a little bit more synthetic, like because you're trying to get an important message out. Like I am trying to like promote ideas about climate change that people should know about and like advance the energy transition and like create a better world. I'm not just like doing this for clicks or like doing this to like, sell some like, like snake oil brand of like, or my, socks that I'm like knitting in my backyard or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's actually, I feel like there's actually meaning behind, nothing against, socks being, knitting socks in the backyard, but I actually feel like there's meaning and importance behind what I'm doing. And so I feel like engaging in like kind of like the new tech, high tech ways of getting your message out there is like what more climate comms people should be at least experimenting with.
Yeah. And admittedly, I also need to get better at that because I have some sort of like vendetta where like I get too purist where I'm like, I will never put out anything that I did right myself because that's weird. And I'm better than that somehow, which, yeah, I am better than that, but I think
transparency is important, I mean, at the same time, like a lot of people, myself included, might just like use AI on the margins or like as kind of like a brainstorming tool. So like, I don't think that necessarily it's kind of like an all or nothing thing, right? And like I said, like usually I don't actually think the chatbot produces copy that is better than mine or is like the fine. It's not like I just like write, put the prompt is like write 500 words on X and then it comes out and it's perfect and it goes on to my website. It's like, it usually needs like a decent amount of like, the human touch behind what I'm doing.
You got to massage it out.
Yeah, it needs my brain needs to do a little bit of exercise there too.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in here again, kind of going back to your consultant hat here. This whole notion, like you said, of kind of having to lean into the new rules of the game, where if you're on social media, especially now in like kind of 2020s social media, where short form has really taken over the majority of the landscape, the way that you end up getting traffic is just sheer quantity. Like you said, flood the zone. I mean, you can, you have people posting the same clip 30, 40 times just to get to like however many posts a day to hit their quota so that the algorithm will pick it up, which, whether that works, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not a social media guy, but I would imagine that some of your work kind of has to play into that side of things as a consultant, right?
I might push back on that a little bit. I think like there's like that's like one track that I feel like it, but and it can work, but I also feel like it can be a red herring because I think that there's a different type of model that is much more like a curated community, and that's why you're seeing things like Substack and Patreon like becoming more popular because like you're really able to like provide like an experience for the audience that's like not just a one-way street of information. It's like you're part of a community and like we want to engage you and we care about what you think, like as the audience, basically. You're not just an audience, you're like a participant. And so I think that that's actually really important. Some people will like pay for the privilege of doing that. Like you're seeing a lot of independent media creators and podcasters like go in that direction. And like I've been thinking about doing that, more myself and trying to lean on that to an extent.
Yeah, and I guess that raises a different question for me. And this was an important thing actually in the design of how we approach Terra.talk and maybe also how you approach Climate Swings is the notion of picking your audience, in that this sort of like what you're talking about, having that more curated community is very nice as a creator because you get people that are engaged, right? You're getting people that are actually routinely watching. You feel like you're not just, it's not like you're on one of these like presenting on a Zoom call where everybody has their screen off and there's 300 people in the room and you don't see any of them. It feels a little more like you're actually, again, it feels more real and tangible. But there's this other element specifically in climate comms that, at least for me, I want to be pushing things out to an audience that might not normally be inclined to listen to this stuff and get people engaged who aren't engaged at all right now. It's not just getting people who are already in the climate sphere to come to like this specific part of the climate sphere. And when you go to that more curated model, at least from my own limited experience, you kind of sacrifice people who might naturally stumble upon it just by like doom scrolling, because you're not taking that approach where you're kind of having to compete with the general rest of the market to get people in. But maybe that's a fraught endeavor anyway. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily just an either or, right? I don't necessarily think it's like just you have to sort of like have this like little walled garden of content and community versus like you have to like kind of just go for like the, just sort of like a freight train of clickbait, right? Like I feel like you can kind of you can be in between, and it kind of depends on it depends on the platform that you're marketing. I think YouTube, for example, like very much is a volume play and prioritizes for like more clickbaity stuff, like, algorithmically mediated outrage and humor and kind of and bizarreness and stuff like that, things that really stand out from the pack. And then, like other social media, I think LinkedIn is a place for sort of more like kind of targeted and focused community conversations, more sophisticated dialogue, basically. So you can do both, but like I think that climate by nature is not necessarily a volume play. Like I can only imagine that probably like the top climate podcasts and climate media outlets probably have like a fraction of a fraction. Even the top ones that are advertising supported and whatnot have a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of like some of the more mainstream podcasting and media topics.
Yeah. Shocking that our ceiling is not Diary of a CEO, right?
Is not that high. No, it is definitely not like Call Her Daddy or
actually,
the Joe Rogan Experience.
Actually, another, if you're going to be tuning in probably a couple weeks here to another episode of Terra.talk, where we're having a person on from Climate Cardinals, which is a nonprofit that translates climate articles in English into other languages. And the founder of Climate Cardinals, who I went to high school with, is part of the Call Her Daddy podcast network. So
that's
we're
so cool.
We're like 2.5 steps removed from Call Her Daddy. So we're putting it on record now.
That's
our ceiling.
Cool. I love that.
So yeah, that's a random fun fact of the day. But yeah, I guess maybe just again, sort of zooming back out on this question of can we raise the ceiling? I mean, are we just doomed to niche content? Like, what do we have any sort of like magic formula in the media space that has any sort of traction? I mean, I guess the biggest kind of climate media does fall into that, induced outrage, right? It's, Greta Thunberg goes off on the billionaires and then someone throws tomato soup at the Mona Lisa. And that's the kind of climate headlines we're getting, which you can argue whether or not that's actually productive. There's definitely climate people on both sides of the issue, but the more subtle and nuanced stuff that's, not just total rage bait, still, we haven't figured that out. And I mean, maybe no one's figured that out across industries. It's just that all of politics is just constant rage bait. So
I don't know. I don't know if it's like, I mean, I feel like if you're looking at it like, oh, we're just like doomed to be like a niche concern. I mean, like I think that gets back to like deeper questions around like why people care about climate change, right? Like why did you start to care about climate change and want to, work as a climate practitioner? Like why did why did I decide to like make it the focus of my career? Like why do people take the Terra course? Like I think that there's like um these innate issues that we want to tap into like as people. And like sort of like as a communicator, you just kind of have to like do the best you can and like speak authentically about what matters to you and not care too much about like, if all you care about is like, number goes up, then like I don't think that that's like a particularly healthy way to like measure impact or like to feel like fulfilled in the work that you're doing.
Oh yeah, 100%. And climate communications is also not the place for you if you're trying to do that. Um, well, actually, now that you've brought it up, I'm curious, what did bring you into the climate comm space? What do you have like a sort of a backstory there?
Yes, I do have the come to Jesus moment. If you want to get to that, so
Let's do it.
it was August of 2020, like depths of COVID. I was I still am in the San Francisco Bay Area. I had moved from Asia, basically from like I mentioned, Greater China, where I lived for a really long time, and like one of the main reasons I moved to the Bay Area is because like China has bad air quality. Like there's like days and days where you just can't leave the house. At least in Beijing, it was like that at the time. And like other other cities in Asia and Greater China also struggle with air pollution pretty. It's a pretty bad problem. And so I moved back to the Bay Area. It's like, kind of like this Garden of Eden type climate. And then like all of a sudden in August 2020, there was this episode that has been like enshrined in lore called the Orange Sky Day. And I don't know if like you heard about that, but it was because like,
yeah, it's because the entire state of California is on fire, right?
The rash of wildfires that was caused by like dry lightning and blah, 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 like, climate mitigated heat waves and everything like that. Or climate sort of, heat waves that were made worse by climate change. Caused like the entire sky basically to go orange, basically. Like the sun could barely peek through. And I remember my partner and my husband and I were actually staying on a houseboat in Sausalito, which is like, actually, if you're looking at this Golden Gate Bridge photo, it's like the city that's
is that your window, Michael? That's crazy.
Right. Actually, I think this is
what's your income stream, Michael?
Exactly. I think
what's making the money?
I think my background is actually from the Sausalito side, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, that looks right.
So anyway,
from my one time in San Francisco 7 years ago.
Right. So anyway, we were staying we were out of our apartment in San Francisco. We were staying on this houseboat, doing our little COVID escape and stuff like that. And then I just remember like waking up that morning of the Orange Sky Day and just like being like, is it still 5 a.m.? Like, has the sun not risen? And just like being like, what is happening? Like, and I was just like, everybody's working remotely. I was like, I could like see across the bay because we were houseboat on the bay. And it was just like, you could look over like the top of Mount Tamalpais, like this gorgeous mountain, across the bay from us. And I was just like, what is happening? Like, why is this happening? Like, we can't like live. This can't be the world that we're like living in, And I remember being like, I left like, Beijing, which had these like days and days where like the air was like pea soup and you couldn't see across the street and just like that. And I was like, I left that to come here. One of the main reasons is because I wanted cleaner air. And I was just like, what is happening? So that was like the catalyst. The jumping off point for me, if I were just like pinpoint a single day that did it. And then it took like another year before I actually like fully decided to go on my own. And, like I felt like, I have climate skills. I have communications skills. I have climate interest. And, why not merge the two and like try my luck as a freelancer? And the rest is history, as they say.
That takes bravery, man. That really does. I mean, just to go off into the unknown as a freelancer. I mean, it's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, it's not that uncommon. I think in the media world, a lot of people who have done what I've done, start their own sort of freelance practices. Again, like, and this goes back to what we were talking about, the changing media landscape. I think a lot of people just like are sort of content to like just do the writing thing and just sort of like sit back and like, be a pen for hire. But nowadays, I don't think you can really do that anymore. I think you need to like craft yourself as like a consultant, a thought partner, like maybe like do more proactive stuff, like do in-person things, do a podcast, like all that stuff.
Yeah, and your brand as an individual now is so much more important because we're in this like whole age of complete distrust, and it's almost what you're saying is as important as who you are and what your background is, and you almost have to like curate your entire image to be trusted in some ways now because you have just so many people, like just kind of points of, just sources of content that are vying for your just attention, your information, that you kind of have to sort based on who's saying it. And then also just this whole misinformation, disinformation, and then now the fun little AI bit where the pure element of trust is like completely out the window, and having to you can't just be a pen for hire now because if they don't know who you are, they're not going to believe you. And it's like you have to put your name out there. You have to almost make statements because it's like the societal like captcha now. It's like hey, I'm human because I'm putting my reputation on whatever I'm saying.
Yeah, Jay, and it's not just writing and communications, it's programming, it's analytical work, it's, engineering calculations, it's like anything that is like a rote function. I mean, it's writing a rote function, but anything that is kind of like generative, that's what they call it, generative AI, is because like, it creates an output.
Roll credits.
Yeah. It creates an output based on what you want it to produce. And so that's, again, I think comes back to like why we need more like, human interaction in not just, communications, but like in every field. Like we need to have, it's what do they say? Like, soft skills, people skills. Like I think that's becoming more and more important. And again, like that's why I've started my own podcast and like I'm doing like live events and trying to actually put people physically in a space together rather than just kind of like, stuck behind a computer screen, like working with a virtual assistant.
Yeah. And as the Gen Z representative here, I can do the Gen Z podcast where I just start the recording and stare at someone until they say something. Like you're in a coffee shop. Yeah. Like, hey, how you doing? And just, huh?
Yeah, well, I do. I mean, hey, it's not just doing the Gen Z thing. It's like the everybody thing, the podcaster thing.
Yeah. And this almost, again, total unrelated side thought here. One thing as I've had to, kind of burst into the more of the comms landscape doing this podcast, I'm starting to realize how little I was actually taught about the art of communication and socializing in school, and how this is almost entirely learned by osmosis thing. And even as I understand it, I didn't study communications, neither did you. But from what I know about studying comms, it's still more of a science of kind of almost how people respond to different, I guess, almost stimuli. It's more, it's again, kind of, it lines up more on psychology, but it's not really necessarily even about how do I get people to like me? How do I get people to trust me? And how do I build that ethos? Because that's so much more like learning by doing. And even if you go to school for that, it's still more of, again, just kind of looking at it from this kind of higher up academic perspective. And growing up, I didn't get a lot of, I mean, they always teach you like persuasive writing, but it's like the 5-paragraph essay, right? It's not like, hey, how do I, get somebody inside of an elevator and get them to consider a thought they hadn't considered in 20, 30 seconds, right? You don't get that side of things.
Well, yeah, I think that's why relationships matter so much, like why, like you said, kind of like getting people to trust you. I mean, like, if you're just like a face on a screen or you just show up in like someone's, LinkedIn feed, like just sort of sight unseen. I mean, like, yeah, where does this come from? There has to be some kind of like connection to something that you know and care about. I mean, like, maybe like, like I think like there's a way to do that, like through creative output, right? Like through the kind of like the sort of the the medium that you produce through your communication, through your work, right? There's like a way to show who you are through that. But then it's also like, I mean, a lot of my clients come from word of mouth because, people say he's great to work with, like he's really smart, like, he's really capable. And so like that kind of like is also a really important way to do this, especially nowadays when like you don't know what you can trust online a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that
and
is
I mean,
totally fair.
and I try to like get guests on my podcast of people whose work I admire and people who I follow, and like people that I want to actually connect with, because like I feel like that's a really good way to also show like get sort of have the halo of like being sort of like in their kind of in their world in a way, like stepping into their world and showing like, look, I'm in that space too, like I'm talking to these people too.
Yeah. And by the way, that's a great pro tip. Skip LinkedIn. Just start a podcast. Like, you'll get so much cool people
Well,
who
you
just want
kind
to
of
talk
need
to
to
you for
do
free.
both. If you really want to get all those people talking to you, kind of have to do both.
Yeah, it's true. I'm
Yeah.
on LinkedIn for the games, so
Although I do have to say that, like, when you're in the climate space, I find that people in general are just like very open and welcoming and willing to talk and like willing to give up their time to talk to you about things, because I think that a lot of people went through things like you and I did, where like we don't really know much about this, or again, back to the imposter syndrome thing, like we feel like we kind of need to like sort of like get over our like fear of doing something important, right? Or like feeling like we can be important, right? And just kind of dive into it. So I think a lot of people are like willing to sort of open their minds to you in ways that maybe other sectors would be more cutthroat or more competitive or just kind
Yeah.
of more like douchebaggery.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's almost also by virtue of the fact that, this is something I say whenever I go back to my university and I talk to people about coming into the climate space, that like climate in and of itself is not really an industry. It's a passion. It's, it's a thought. It's a field of interest. But it's hard to say like, oh, I'm good at climate. Like, huh? And what that means is that when people work in the kind of, for however much I think this term's kind of weird, the climate industry, they've all been brought together by a common concern about something. And it's a concern about something that is generally pretty outsized and largely not shared by a lot of people. So, and in any sort of comms, and climate comms included, it takes two to tango, right? Like you can put out as great of a message as you want. If no one's listening and if no one cares and no one communicates back, then it's just kind of a dead end. And from, I think, both of our experiences, because people care so much about what's happening, it is so easy to just get in touch with people and connect with people. Like I can get on a call with effectively anybody in this space just by virtue of the fact that I'm interested, they're interested. That's the only baseline we need, and it feels so much less transactional. And I think, I mean, that's almost to me sort of the holy grail of the climate comm space specifically, and why it's, at least to me, a lot more fun doing media and comms work in this space versus other places, because you just have a bunch of people that care and will engage, and you don't have to like bait them into engaging, because they're already there, they're eager, they're ready. And that's actually part of the reason why I started Terra.talk, is because we have this network at Terra.do of like, I think there's the newsletter is like 50,000 followers, and people are really active in these groups. Like they'll read things. They're super proactive. They'll like share all sorts of books and articles. Like, this is a passion. And I'm like, I want to be a part of this. I want to, help kind of build that snowball. And it's way less like, herding cats or pulling teeth in this space. And that's one of the things I really love about being in this kind of area.
Well, I would also say that like the failures of the climate movement to accelerate progress to the point where we can meet the Paris Agreement aims of 1.5 degrees, almost points to the need for more diverse voices and diverse perspectives and different approaches and ways of thinking about how to communicate and just ways of doing, and just throwing Jello against the wall and seeing what sticks, right? I think that there's a really interesting podcast called Climate Shifted. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah, it's also part of the Terra.do network loosely, actually.
It's hosted by by a Terra alum, Eva Fry, and like I think she does a really interesting job of like talking to people who are doing different things in kind of like the climate comms world, I guess, like broadly defined, and sort of like how messaging around climate can sort of take different forms, and like why. Like I remember one of her guests was talking about like yell, tell, sell, which I feel like is sort of the stock and trade for a lot of climate communicators, and why that doesn't work, and the whole psychological underpinnings of it. And I feel like I don't know, even just like you and me talking, like it feels empowering for you and me. And I feel like, once we put this out online, like, I don't know, maybe there's someone out there who thinks like maybe I can do this too, or maybe there's something in here that I care about. Maybe there's like, space for me in this world too. So like I feel like the more that like people like us, these kind of like gadfly types, like show that we are like that we just are doing this because we really care, like I'm not getting like some kickback here. Like I'm doing this because I'm donating my time because I care.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I full financial disclosure here. I'm in the red on this podcast. I'm way in the red. It ain't coming back up. But I think that's also a kind of maybe another important element. People listen to these things and they're like, oh, well, maybe I have something to say. But even I find myself in this sort of mental dilemma where climate is still such a, much like climate comms, even more so when you just talk about climate, it's just this big old bubble, this nebulous thing. And it's kind of this blunt force object. We use the word climate and we kind of smack people over the head with it. And I find myself, I'll listen to Terra.talk. Yes, I listen to my own episodes sometimes. Call me a narcissist. And then I'll listen to Climate Swings and I'll listen to Climate Shifted. And and I'm kind of sitting here thinking to myself, like, are we all just doing the same thing? And the answer is no, absolutely not. We all have pretty distinctly different subject matter. But understanding and maybe giving better voice to that nuance of what we're doing, and that this has as much diversity as something like tech, or as something like, like the medical sciences, that there is so much there that can be expressed in so many different ways. And even though sometimes it feels like, we're talking about the same thing because we all have the word climate in our podcast title, the actual material content of what we're doing is so different.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that if you go into podcasting, like of any form, really, like with an aim to like, monetize and become a gazillionaire, like I think you're going to be like sorely disappointed. And I think climate,
Oh yeah.
climate is the sort of like the prime example of that, basically. Like, all the more so like it's hard to monetize anything in climate, like let alone like podcasting and communications work and stuff like that. And so, we do it because we care. We do it because we're passionate, but we also do it because, like, I think we have something to say. Like, like we want to, tell stories, connect with people, be around like-minded people. Again, like, I think that, goes back to like just sort of being in this kind of like algorithmically mediated vortex of information, like can feel really alienating, especially in climate where like a lot of the messages can be really bleak and depressing.
Oh yeah.
Like, when you talk to people who are doing interesting things or have interesting things to say, and then like that sparks your idea, and then it goes back to them, and it's just this kind of alchemy that like, you can't get with a chatbot.
Yeah.
I'd say I'll just put it right out there. I don't think you can get that with the chat.
Absolutely not. No, chatbots actively make me depressed. And you touched on something here that I think, again, I know helped shape the design of this podcast, and I think, given from what I've listened to in your podcast, also probably shaped the design of your podcast, that, a lot of climate messaging, kind of intro level climate comms, and I think this is largely actually due to the way that we learn about climate change and that we're educated about climate change in a lot of spheres, is that so much of the narrative and so much of the content is focused on problem identification, saying, like, pointing at something, be like, that's bad, the sky's orange, I can't breathe. And these, seeing all of these again, very reasonably kind of bad things happening in the world, and saying that's a problem and we need to fix it, like something needs to happen. But there's I'd say a pretty drastically lower amount of media and literature focused on the actual creation of solutions and hope and mobilizing people in concrete directions. Because again, I'm just going to keep coming back, maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but this theme that it's just this massive bubble where you go, oh, I want to do something about climate change. And then you go, what? And I know part of, again, what the reason that Terra.talk was born was to help kind of combat that feeling and try to give people these touch points of, okay, well, this guy is kind of close to what I maybe want to do in this industry. What does his day look like? What does he do all day? Or what does she do all day? What do they do all day? And giving a bit more of that kind of grip and that sort of lily pad to jump off of. And for you, right, climate swings, the whole purpose is like, hey, you can have these wildly different career transitions where you start off in like, Mars and you end up in the climate space. And I think that's so cool, by the way. I love the overall theme and content of Climate Swings. It's awesome. But I think, this is total brand. I don't know why I'm talking, but this, just finding that narrative and really focusing on not only identifying a problem, but also moving towards a tangible solution that other people can follow is such an important part of effective comms that doesn't make people feel like you're just preaching at them or like kind of dunking on them. And, when you do that, people actually pay attention and people will listen and people will want to come back, right? That's kind of the goal of this. We want people to listen to more than one episode.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that like there's something about climate change in particular that actually, that makes it difficult for people to engage with because it is such a mirror on humanity in general, right? Because because it is so tightly tied to like, the day-to-day lives of everyday people, because it's like, the air we breathe, it's the like turning on the lights, it's starting your car, it's cooking dinner. It's like, it's everything. It's everywhere, right? It's like, it's the background noise. And so I think that like, again, sort of like trying to frame and develop innovative and oblique and, maybe humorous or kind of like disarming ways of communicating about it, I think is really important. And like, I don't love most cli-fi as the climate fiction, as they say, because I find that it can be like a little too on the nose. And I love allegory, I thought that movie Don't Look Up, I didn't like the movie for executional reasons, but I think that that's sort of like the right way to almost like talk about climate in a lot of senses, because like it is allegorical and isn't just like finger wagging like, some rabid environmentalist is just like, fighting for justice or whatever, right? Like, and again, like I think going back to Climate Swings, what I think is really interesting, I didn't even like intentionally craft it this way, but like I can go for like a whole, my conversation is usually about an hour, and like obviously climate is like a big component of what I talk about, but like oftentimes we're just like, talking about the person's background, what they wanted to be when they grow up, like what their college experiences were like what their early career was like. And some people did have climate sort of like baked in from the very beginning because they were an environmental scientist or like, they studied like, battery chemistry or whatever it is. But like a lot of people like come, like you said, they come from kind of like wild and crazy backgrounds and they made these like sort of crazy swings. So like you don't even mention the word climate until maybe like halfway through the episode or something, right? And it just shows that like you can sort of like have these back and side doors into climate without necessarily being like, climate, here's why you should care. And then like, most lay people are just like, bye.
Yeah. And I mean, again, even internally to the climate space, this is just my own personal opinion, but I think that's so much healthier, right? Because one, there's this fun little thing called burnout. When you watch one too many documentaries about how the planet's going to explode, then, you kind of don't want to, it's not fun anymore. It's like, Mom, I want to go home. But the other bit is just that, you want to be able to do something tangible, right? And when you come at this whole problem from like super backwards ways, like you said, climate's a mirror of society, right? Nobody's exempt from this thing, and it touches on everything. And I haven't seen it in a while, but there's another podcast on the Terra Network. Can you tell we like podcasting? Called Every Job is a Climate Job, I think. And it's more on that notion of no matter what you do, it's kind of like that, what is it? Like 7 Steps to Kevin Bacon, that Wikipedia game, or if you click on,
I know Louisa well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you can connect everything back, fairly quickly to this single topic of climate. And when we look at it from that much broader scope and not having to come at it from like this single focal point, I think better things happen,
Yeah, and I think that there's also a need to humanize and make it feel real, like make it feel like you can see yourself in climate. I mean, whatever the hell that means, right? Like you can sort of like find an entry point as just like sitting in your world,
Mhm.
Like because I think a lot of climate people expect that like everyone is just gonna like wake up one day and realize that like we're doing terrible things to the planet and like we all need to change our behaviors or we all need to vote for the right people. And like I don't think that's how this works. Like we need to meet people where they are and like engage with them on a level that like they care about, not that we think they should care about.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, even this topic of like, it sends like, makes me get goosebumps. The whole idea of like finding the right people to vote for, that whole narrative it pisses me off so much, right? It's like that is a reality, because as much as, I'd like climate to be this gateway to societal reform and seeing our social and economic and political systems become healthier, there's also this cynical bit of me that just is like, human nature is just that we want to implode on ourselves. Like there's always that bit, and that there's not going to be any one magic button where like we're going to use this issue and create a utopia. That this idea of like human conflict and there being very polarized sides of political hot button issues, like that's not going to, even if we, if we get to 1.5 and reverse it and go back to net zero, like that's not going to change. And this idea, like we shouldn't have to have a right person to vote for to fix this thing, right? It's that I should be able to look at somebody who I effectively disagree with on every count of humanity and still come to the same conclusion. Like, I'd like to be able to breathe. Right?
Yeah, Jay, I mean, I think that like, we have to sort of like hold two conflicting or multiple conflicting viewpoints in our head at the same time, right? Like we have to both like have faith that like humanity like can and will ultimately like do the right thing. Like if you have a long enough view of the sweep of history, essentially, right? Like I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like the sun will envelop the earth and the universe will implode, or like sort of just burn out. So like what's the difference anyway? But like you also just are like looking at the day-to-day, like, collapse in institutions and just kind of backsliding on all of our pledges. And, like you're hitting new record highs in temperatures and just like natural disaster after natural disaster, they just start to all bleed together. And it's like, yeah, like this really sucks. Like this really fucking sucks, like what can we do about it? Why don't more people care? So, I think that like that's why people like you and me are doing what we do, is because like, we want to feel like what we're doing is making a difference, right? Like we don't want to just like go to some, completely unrelated job. And, like I'm sure that we can find meaning and plenty of people find meaning in other work. But like, the back of our mind, there would always be this little, kind of like tickle of like, why aren't we doing more? Like, could we be doing more? Like, oh, I didn't recycle that thing today, or I, ate more meat today, or I drove my car today. And you're just like, I don't want to feel like I'm hitting myself over the head with like a guilt stick every 5 seconds, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I want to feel like I'm actually making a positive contribution.
It's funny because I actually even struggle with that. This is turning into a therapy session. I struggle with that with this podcast and just communicating as a whole, because, I try not to be like the number go up guy, but when you're a communicator, you're rarely the first kind of, you're not the first point of change, where you're not directly doing the thing that's going to cause the change. You're saying the thing that's going to give people the thought that they need to do the thing or tell somebody else to do the thing. And you're kind of your greatest asset is your base. your audience, the people who are listening. And when I, don't see a number go up, I get this sort of feeling of like, what am I doing wrong? What game am I not playing? I need to be like the best evangelist. I need to be the one who's like who's doing generational numbers in order to get this message out there, or I'm also not doing enough. Because then if I don't know, I could be walking around downtown picking trash up off the streets or something. I
No, I
don't
mean
know.
that's I think that's a fair point, but I would also like, sort of like harken back to like the butterfly effect, right? Of like, you're putting this content out into the airwaves and like, maybe you have a listener who gives birth to like the person who whatever, like creates the the magic commercialization pathway to fusion energy. Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't.
Yeah, it's always
right?
it's a moot point. I mean, you can always like guilt yourself into something, and I mean, there's obviously just kind of the psychological component of this that I think many a climate person struggles with, of like the idea of we're not moving fast enough, or I'm not doing enough, and
like I'm sure that even like Joe Rogan probably looks at his numbers on a down day and is just like, like how come that number isn't high enough? Right?
it's incredible how much the goalpost can move.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%.
In that break that you just witnessed, Michael and I kind of went off the rails. It's going to be a bonus clip on YouTube. I think we went into topics of bagels, Europe, China, climate relations, and I just spilled water on myself. So if you want to hear,
don't forget
and
about
pizza, and Michael's favorite pizza spot in San Francisco that he's trying to visit a couple more times before he moves to Barcelona. And if any Barcelona people are in the Terra sphere, or if you know people in climate in Barcelona, talk to people.
There definitely are. I've already connected with a couple, so
that is exciting. That is really exciting. But yeah, so this obviously this whole episode's been all over the place. But Michael, any closing thoughts? Just what's your? This is kind of maybe back into the Terra.talk spirit a little bit. We always end with like section 3 is what should we do, and we want to leave people with a takeaway. We want to, when I take out my headphones and this podcast is done, I'm going to get up and do something. It's if I want to be in a climate comms career, what should I do? Or if I just am an interested person and I want to become a better communicator, I want the people at the dinner table to not run away from me. What are my action steps? And obviously it's such a loaded question, but what do you got? Just hit me with something. Break the fourth wall, because for the 3 people who've gotten to the end of this labyrinth of an episode, give them something to go home with.
I would say smash the like, subscribe button, tell a friend, leave a rating and a review, because
there we go.
I'm not kidding. Like, leave it on Terra.talk. Leave it on Climate Swings. The Climate Swings Substack is climateswings.substack.com. Like, all these independent climate voices need your support. I mean, like, shameless self-promotion, but like myself included. So like, come and engage with us. Send us guest ideas. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your friend's family. Like, help build the actual, network, galvanize people to care more and to do more.
Yeah, and totally. And these media productions that we make aren't like, self-serving. They're meant to really foster community and to bring people together and to help come up with doing cool stuff and coming up with cool ideas that might strike gold and change the world at some point. So it really is like we are the stewards and the curators of the content that hopefully make you want to come back and listen to more. And we want to give you those ideas, but we want to know what ideas to give too. So if you have any interests in specific topics, like, hit us up. I mean, I think we both have our contact info and feedback forms that are attached to our episodes. And like, we mean it when we say like, hit us up, give us content, give us ideas, because we really value shaping these things around what people want to listen to, what people care about, because, that's why we do this.
Yeah, or go start your own podcast, tell your own story, or like, talk to other people that you're interested in and put it online. Why not? I mean, everybody else is doing it.
Exactly. It's what the
It's
cool
not as
kids
hard as
do.
it looks either, honestly. There's a learning curve, but you can get, anyone can do it.
Yeah, that's all you got to do is get a microphone that kind of looks like this and act like you know what you're talking about. Yeah, Michael has a bigger production budget than I do.
I definitely do not have a bigger production budget. I think
Oh.
I've spent all of maybe $450 in the last year on my podcast. So it's still in the red. No, actually, still in the red.
Yeah, it's however many dollars I spent on the podcast in the red.
Exactly.
Well, awesome. Michael, thank you so much for coming on this pod. It's been fun. This is almost like the forbidden fruit that's going to make me stop adhering to my own format. I need to resist the urge now.
Well, this is really breaking the fourth wall in every sense of the word. So but again, where you're not just the disembodied voice on the coming out of the speakers, and I'm not just the disembodied voice coming out of the speakers. We are real people, and we do this because we love it. So that's it.
Absolutely. This is the passion project, and hopefully y'all got to see the passion come through here. So, Michael, thank you for coming on. Hopefully at some point we will have more cross collaboration between Terra.talk and Climate Swings. If you have not yet done your homework, go listen to Climate Swings. He releases every 2 weeks. I will also be releasing every 2 weeks, and I will probably make some vague effort to stagger those releases. So we'll give you something new and cool to listen to every single week. So between the two of us, you'll get your weekly fix of climate optimism and career advice and whatever else you listen to climate podcasts for.
Interesting kooky stories. That's what I go for.
There we go. I like that. And we've had some interesting kooky stories come up on Terra.talk too. And we're about to have a lot more. So stay tuned to both of us. And we will see you, or I will see you in 2 weeks. And Michael will probably see you next week if I upload this on schedule, which is a coin flip.
Good luck. I can do it. Climate Swings is produced, hosted, and edited by me, Michael Gold. Show notes, transcripts, and other material can be found at climateswings.substack.com or on the dedicated show website, wordclouds.consulting/climateswings. If you liked this episode, please rate and review it, subscribe to the Climate Swings Substack and YouTube channels, and please spread the word. I've received some great feedback and suggestions for guest ideas from my audience, and please do keep them coming. I love hearing from you. You can reach me at climateswings@wordclouds.consulting. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a lovely day.